Kelly, we're going to talk about club meetings. What makes them good, what makes a bad meeting. What was your first experience at a club level meeting?
At a club level, I was invited out by my neighbor, and she invited me out several times before I was able to come. We had small kids, and I went to the meeting, and it was quite interesting. It was quite interesting to me because they started the meeting and they sang "O Canada," and then they sang this song. And from a new person's point of view, I went, look at these grown people. They're clapping and holding hands and singing a silly song. And I'm not interested in doing that. This is a weird club. I don't want to be part of any of this. So then the next time I was invited out to a meeting, I said, I don't want to do that song. I'm not holding anybody's hand. So it was funny because for quite a few meetings, I was pretty obstinate and didn't want to do the song, and they obliged me. We didn't do the song. And then once I got into the history of Kin and I understood what Kin was all about, and I learned the history of the song, I wanted to do the song.
Do you hear that from other members talking about, oh, that song's so hokey, I don't want to do that? Is that a common thread?
I think so, and I also think that one of the things we forget to do is explain to people ahead of time, maybe give them the history of the song so they understand it a little bit better. Because especially my husband, he's a Lake Cowichan kinsman, and that was the thing that almost deterred him from not coming. Is he didn't want to hold any guy's hands and shake their hand, and hold their hands and sing a song. He didn't want to do that. Now, I explained to him the history of the song and why we sing the song.
And so what is that history?
The history is it was about camaraderie and fellowship, and the history of Kin way back to 1920. It was something Hal Rogers wanted. So that's it's part of the history of Kin, and it's something that you don't want to erase. I've
been to clubs that don't use that, and I feel that there's something missing that we don't, they don't get, they don't feel a part of, just because they don't do that Kin song. So I feel that you're right, that we have it there for a reason. A new member might not understand, but with the proper explanation, it does work well. What about running a smooth meeting? What does that look like?
Running a smooth meeting is something that's a little bit of a skill. You have to make sure you have executive meetings as well as a general meeting. Because at a general meeting, that's when everybody's there, and you only have a couple hours. People only have a couple hours in their time, and somewhere in there it has to be fun, it has to be informative, it has to be educational and interactive. You have to give people time to talk. So one of the ways to do that is to have your executive meet ahead of time. They go through the correspondence that's mailed to the club, they weed it out, they come up with recommendations for the club, and they bring that to the general meeting. So that the other thing is, when you have your general meeting and there is committee reports, you make sure that they are
reports and not taking over the meeting.
Yeah, and we don't necessarily need a verbal report of every single
detail.
Just did it go well, did it not go well, and the full report is available, whether depending on where your filing system is, but they should have a full report written that's accessible, so if somebody really wants to go into detail. But you can't let somebody take over an hour of the meeting telling about it.
Right. That's one of the importance of having a bulletin at the meeting, too. I've been to clubs where they don't have a bulletin and the agenda seems to wander all around, and so a good bulletin editor is a really key part of keeping the meeting succinct.
Absolutely. And following the agenda.
Yes.
Like following the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, say to people, here's the agenda. If you can, circulate the agenda ahead of time. Send it out a couple days by email and say, hey, everybody have a look at the agenda so you know what's up and coming. If you can't be there, send in your opinion. If there's something important on there that you can't be there for, but you really want to be part of the discussion, phone in and we'll put you on speakerphone and we'll let you listen to what we're discussing. A good meeting should never involve huge amounts of money being motioned to be spent without without a good quorum, without lots of input.
And perhaps even a notice of motion depending on the House rules.
Yeah, depending on your House rules. And just make sure people have time. The same thing is a big project shouldn't be taken on without a good portion of your club there saying they'll do it. And if it comes right down to 5 people want to do the project and 5 people don't want to do the project and you're the president, you remember that you vote against, because you don't want to take 5 people and force them to do something they don't want to do.
And that's what, in essence, you would be doing.
Correct.
So what about a meeting that goes off the rails and doesn't, it's disorganized and we got chatter and groups of people going in different directions? How does a chairman get that back on course?
Well, one thing you can do is you can motion for a break. You can, motion for a drink break so people can stop and they can go get themselves a pop or water or a beverage of choice. And then you can say, I'm having a really hard time pulling this back together. If you guys want to be out of here by 9 o'clock, you're going to, how do you want me to handle this? Because again, you're the chair of the meeting, you're not the boss. So you need to make sure, you're asking the people what they want.
So communication and guidance is basically what you're doing.
One of the things, you shouldn't be discussing anything unless there's a motion on the floor. So if, I make a motion to buy a green houseboat, and there's no seconder, we don't talk about buying a green houseboat. But sometimes I'll say, I motion to buy a green houseboat, and somebody wants to know more about that, so they'll say, I'm going to second that. They're not saying that they also want to buy the green houseboat. They're saying, when you second something, you're saying, I think that warrants some discussion. So now I have a motion on the floor with a seconder. So now we are to talk about only the green houseboat and whether or not we should buy it. We're not going to talk about whether or not we're going to take the green houseboat over across Maple Bay for the weekend to go stay there. We can't. When people say, yeah, and if we get that green houseboat, we can go over here, you have to pull them back in and say, the motion on the floor is whether or not we buy the green houseboat. So can we just stay on track and talk about that? You need to pull them back in and just remind them, but again, using respect and acknowledgement that what they're saying is valid, but you're not there to stifle the discussion, but you're there to channel the discussion so that it can be decided on in a timely manner.
What would happen if that green houseboat didn't have a good description or didn't have a lot of the details? What happens then if members don't know enough about this green houseboat to make a decision?
Well, then you could ask for the motion to be tabled. And you could say, I want to table that motion, and the reason I want to table it is because I would like to form a committee, and I would like someone to go out and find out how much the houseboat is going to cost, what the risk is involved of us owning this houseboat, all the particulars, and come back with a committee report. And then, so you could table the motion, you could just lay it on the table, which means that we're not going to talk about the houseboat anymore unless somebody brings it back up again, or you could just table the motion until next Thursday at 8 o'clock. Well, automatically on the agenda next Thursday at 8 o'clock, that would come back up, and hopefully you have enough information that you can all make an informed decision.
Can you table a motion to whenever you want?
Absolutely. You could say, I'd like to table this motion till in 3 meetings from now, when I know that I can have the owner of the houseboat that's selling the houseboat show up. So I would like to table the meeting till March 27th at 8 o'clock, that meeting, and I will have the owner there.
Perfect. What about all the information's been laid out? We've had people talking for the motion, people talking against the motion, and we seem to have talked it all out. What would happen next? What should happen next?
When people start repeating themselves or the discussion goes on and on and on, any member in your group can say, I'm ready to end this discussion and I'd like to vote on it. So in order to get that across, you need to say, at this time I'd like to call the question. And me calling the question, all I'm saying is that, I've heard enough and I'm ready to vote. So at that time, the chair needs to say, okay, we have somebody over here which a person that has called the question. How does everybody else feel about it? Are you guys ready to end the discussion as well? And if everybody says, yeah, I'm ready to vote, then the question has been called. Then you say, all in favor of calling the question and ending the discussion and voting, please raise your hand. If there is a majority of the people that are ready to end the discussion, then that motion is carried. So then we vote on whether or not we're going to buy this household. Because the motion's been on the table, it's been seconded, it's been discussed. Now the question has been called, so the discussion is now ended, and now it's up to you to vote.
So you're going on to the vote now. How important is it to maybe repeat or reiterate what the original motion was, just to keep the intent of the motion going in a proper direction, no confusion?
It's really important because sometimes people can get confused as to exactly what they're voting on. So it's up to the chair to say, so I'm going to ask right now, all in favor of buying a green houseboat. If you're in favor of buying a green houseboat, please put up your hands. People could misconstrue that, and they thought they were buying a blue houseboat. So they all vote. Now we all vote, and we're all buying a green houseboat. And then someone goes, oh, I thought that the houseboat was going to be blue. And 3 more people say, yeah, we thought the houseboat was going to be blue as well. You can actually fix that by one person saying, I would like a motion to reconsider. And so then you need a seconder to consider, and then everybody has to agree that, yeah, let's bring that back to the table because some of us didn't quite get it right. Some of us thought it was blue, some of us thought it was green. So you ask people, okay, there's a motion to reconsider on the floor, all those in favor. We are in favor. So then, at that time, the original motion comes back to the floor, and the motion is back on the floor to buy the green houseboat. The seconder is still there. You start to discuss it again. And then you say, no, we're going to talk about it. But someone says, well, I thought it was blue and I want a blue houseboat. So they can amend it to say, I want to buy a blue, I would like to amend that to say we'd like to buy a blue houseboat. And then at that time, the amendment comes onto the floor.
And then the amendment is dealt with?
And then you only talk about whether or not you want to buy a blue houseboat. You don't talk about whether you're going to buy a green houseboat. You talk about if you're going to buy a blue houseboat.
And then you vote on that
And then you vote on the amendment, and then the amendment's defeated. Nobody wants to buy a blue houseboat. So now you're back to the original motion.
And you vote on that?
Yeah, all those in favor of buying a green houseboat. The other thing you can have is you can have this big, long discussion. You can have somebody motions to buy a houseboat. Somebody motions to buy a green houseboat. Or they amend it to say, I would like to buy a green houseboat. So now you have an amendment on the floor. And then a third person can say, you know, I motion to buy a green houseboat with that's 25 feet long. So now you have all of these questions on the floor. So somebody can stand up and say, I motion to call the question on all the previous questions. So that means you're going to vote on whether you want a 25-foot houseboat and a 25-foot green houseboat. You're going to vote on that first amendment, and then you're going to immediately move to the next amendment, and then you're going to immediately move to the original motion. You're just going to keep voting. You don't have to keep going back to discussion every time. Because if somebody doesn't call the question on all the previous questions, then you have to discuss each and every amendment over and over again until you...
And that can take up a lot of time and membership energy.
And that's why they have Kin Rules of Order, so that you can actually get the business done in an allotted time amount.
And that's crucial for keeping membership, in my opinion, because we tend to stretch our meetings longer than they need to be, and people aren't interested in sitting around listening to somebody
people
talk.
sit there and if they're there too late and they get up the next day and they're tired and they have a hard day at work, they're going to say, you know what, I don't want to go to those meetings anymore because I'm too tired in the morning to go to work. You have to keep it professional, and one thing about running a good meeting is once you have the knack of running a good meeting and once you've been involved in a good meeting, you can go to a board meeting of any type, and you can understand when you're allowed to talk at the mic and when you're not. And democracy demands that people are allowed the freedom of speech and the freedom of opinion so that they can influence others either way. So if you don't understand how to speak at a smaller meeting, then you're not going to understand how to speak at the bigger meeting.
Right. What about when they're talking about the houseboat and we're looking at different features like different colors, different lengths and stuff like that? Would it be pertinent to go into what they call a committee as a whole?
Oh, sure. Somebody at any time, they can say, I'd like to go into a committee as a whole. And once you go into a committee as a whole, once it's accepted, you say, we're going to go into a committee of a whole for, say, 10 minutes. And for 10 minutes, you can all just talk freely. And, you can say, I don't even want a house.
You don't even need to address the chair, do you?
No, you don't have to address the chair. You don't have to address anybody. You just have to keep it respectful. You sort of have a conversation back and forth. And at the end of 15 minutes, you always have someone keep time. You say the committee of the whole has ended, so then you go back to the formal.
Do you need a motion to go back on that?
No. If you have a motion that says that we go into the whole for 15 minutes, at the end of 15 minutes, it's done.
And you go back to the meeting, back to protocol.
Correct.
Okay, nice. I think that's all we've got. What about one more issue? What if somebody wanted to talk about the houseboat, and they got into the committee of the whole, they went over a whole bunch of topics, and we came back out of the committee of the whole, and somebody puts their hand up and goes, what was the original motion? The chairman doesn't really remember. Where do we go to get that? The person that's taking the minutes should have it, because as soon as a motion is made, your secretary should be writing down what the motion is. Preferably, you have little pieces of paper on the table, and if somebody wants to submit a motion, they write it out and they hand it in, and it's read out by the secretary. So the secretary position, absolutely.
It has to be clear, and people have to understand what they're voting on, and at any time, if there's any chatter and you don't understand what you're voting on, you can always call a question of privilege, and you can say, you can interrupt everything for a question of privilege. You can stand up and say, no, I can't hear. I can't hear because these two people beside me are talking about what they did last night. And I'm trying to concentrate on whether or not I want to vote on this, and I need some help here. Or you could say, I can't concentrate very well. The fridge is making way too much noise. Can we fix that? Because I have problems hearing. At any time. And you need to make your members comfortable so that they can hear, they're comfortable in their surroundings.
That's key for a good meeting. Thank you, Kelly.